Thank you so very much for joining us. Tonight we're discussing the issues facing the 6th Congressional District in Kentucky. Joining us tonight are incumbent Republican Congressman Andy Barr of Lexington, Libertarian Frank Harris of Lexington, and Democrat Amy McGrath of Georgetown. Later on, Mr. Harris, to you, you're up against some very well-resourced challengers in this race. So what does your candidacy bring to this contest, and what kind of congressman would you be if elected?
Renee, I want to say first, thank you very much for having me here. And, you know, the Libertarian Party is a small party. We only have 8,500 members. We have made small incremental gains over the years. I left the Republican Party 6 years ago because I could no longer tolerate the things that I saw that were wrong in the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party has similar problems. But what I saw in the Republican Party was they talked about balancing budgets, but when they have control of the White House, the Senate, and the House, they don't balance the budget. The Democrats promise things that they don't deliver on. So I left the Republican Party because of those frustrations. What I see is that Americans in general are concerned about fundamental things like overspending. A big part of my campaign has been about, I want to balance the budget. I want to address the debt. These are things that ordinary people believe in, and they're not seen from the two major parties. There are more people now than ever before that are registered independent or third party. 10% of the population now is registered independent. In Kentucky, another 5% is registered third party. Those are the people that are going to watch me. Those people are more issue driven. They're not doing what their party tells them to do. They are looking for answers for themselves. So I'm the guy that wants to reduce spending. I'm the guy that wants to return America to a constitutional footing. The federal government has not followed the Constitution for far too long, and they need to.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So let me go to Mr. Harris real quickly on a couple of quick comments about civility and political discourse.
Sure. You know, what I see is that when I'm in person with somebody, I treat them completely differently than if I'm talking to them on Facebook and disagreeing with them on Facebook. When you see somebody face to face and you can look into their eyes and see what they're feeling and see the nuances of their expression and everything, you treat people differently. I find that when people in person are much nicer than people on Facebook. And so I think a lot of people, they only get their source of news from one source. And when people are only getting one source of information, quite often they're getting bad information. I try to find whatever I think the truth is. I want to know what the truth is. And I think the media, not KET, but the media in broader sense, is very guilty of choosing one side or the other and portraying a narrative which is completely false. I've seen so many stories that I felt like I knew what the actual truth was, and I would go to one channel and see something that made it sound one way, and then another channel that made it sound completely the other way. You have to dig and find out what the truth is. But we need to treat each other like people.
Right. Okay.
Not throw it away for purely political reasons.
That's what I do need to get Mr. Harris in for just a second here. Mr. Harris, please.
Well, I hope I get more than 1 second because they've had the last 5 minutes. But
you're right.
My opinion is, and the position of the Libertarian Party, is that government intervention has created the crisis we're in today because we no longer have a free market. We haven't had the free market since at least the 1980s, going back to HMOs. You can trace the dramatic rise in healthcare costs and in college education costs directly to government intervention. Government controls today how many doctors, how many nurses, how many healthcare professionals are allowed to be trained. They control how many hospitals are allowed to be built. And I've got a neighbor, and I've talked to many veterans who have gone to the VA. I had an uncle that served in World War II that went to the VA. VA healthcare is not very good. There's long waits. Drastically long waits. They have to go to a VA center. Why can't vets go to the doctor of their choosing? Why can't they get vouchers to go to any doctor they want? Government intervention is the root cause of the rise in healthcare.
Mr. Harris, I want to ask you this question. This came in from a web form message from Mike Barber in Winchester. He says, I am a Vietnam veteran. The question I have is, what is Congress going to do about the problems we face every day, whether financial or health? So what would you say to Mr. Barber?
Well, I would want for the government to allow veterans to go to any doctor they wanted to go to any hospital they wanted to go to, and be treated in the way they wanted to be treated, not the way the government mandated that they be treated. We need more options.
The gentleman will be more progressive.
Mr. Harris, comment here on the debt and federal tax cuts.
If you notice, I have not been getting a whole lot of airtime on here. So those of you that want to hear my complete answers on all the questions, including the ones I'm not being asked, please go to my website, www.votefrankharris.com. I'll have more complete answers to all these questions on my website within 48 hours. So in general, on the debt, I was wrong in the interview that Renee and I did that we taped last week. 7% of all the money that we spend in 2018 is going toward interest on the debt. That figure is projected to triple over the next 8 or 9 years. The debt will eventually consume more and more of the budget to the point where it overtakes spending on everything else. Right now, interest on the debt is the number 4 item on the pie chart of the total budget, behind Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Interest, as interest rates climb and as the debt itself climbs, is only going to increase. The Trump budget's going to be a shortfall of at least $1.5 trillion. The Republicans have not done what they said they were going to do to balance the budget. They will not do what they said they were going to do to balance the budget.
This question to you from Jessie Green, or Jess Green in Jessamine County. As a younger voter, she says, I'm extremely concerned about the mounting debt that both parties have been responsible for. How would you, as a libertarian, work to tackle the budget deficit? Something specific. Give me 2 to 3 specific points, please, sir.
I will be very glad to. This is also on my website. So in my world, it's very simple. First, you have to pay down the debt. The debt's growing. So what I would do first is pay down 2% of the debt every year. That would be approximately $400 billion. So you take that first from whatever revenues you have. You use last year's revenues as your figure, not projected revenues, because projected revenues are always overly optimistic. Andy would probably agree with that. And so first you pay down the debt. You take whatever money you have left and you apply it to whatever you think you need. If the Democrats and Republicans can't agree on what to cut, then you have to cut everything proportionally. That's the only way to do it.
Can I say something about the deficit?
And
final point here is that my opponent, if she was elected, would have zero influence with this administration.
Thank you for that point. Mr. Harris.
Andy touched on tariffs, and libertarians are definitely against tariffs. Tariffs hurt the tax or the consumer. Nobody, like Andy said, wins in a trade war. But there's a false narrative being portrayed about China that somehow we're being ripped off by China. We benefit greatly from cheap Chinese labor, cheap Chinese products, and we should be counting ourselves lucky that the Chinese are still willing to take a U.S. dollar that is being greatly devalued because of overprinting of the U.S. dollar. The fact that we use a fiat currency that is not backed by anything is going to lead to the ruination of America. We're going to see it within our lifetimes, and this is something we haven't talked about. We also haven't talked about our foreign policy, our over-involvement in the Middle East, our occupation and bombings of other countries, and the fact that we were lied to get us into Iraq, we were lied to get us into Vietnam, we're currently being lied to get us into Syria, and to try to create increased tensions between us and Russia.
Okay, so let me ask you real quickly since we're on foreign policy, about Afghanistan. Earlier this year, the Pentagon said that the Afghan war is costing American taxpayers $45 billion this year. It's considered America's longest war. Should we continue to be there or bring the troops home?
Absolutely not. We have no business being in Afghanistan. We would not be in Afghanistan if it weren't for the rare earth elements and other things that we need for our cell phones and our electronics. We wouldn't be in the Middle East if it weren't for oil. So we're also being given a false narrative about why we're in the Middle East, about it being about terrorism. It's always about resources. Wars are always about resources and about global domination. Our founding fathers did not want this. They wanted us to be the shining city on the hill. They did not want us to be the biggest bully on the block.
We're actually countering Russian aggression by kicking out the diplomats from
What about American aggression, Andy? What about American aggression? Has America been aggressive overseas?
Quickly, sir, 30 more seconds on your answer, please.
So just to finish the point, as the chairman of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over sanctions, I not only supported sanctions against Russia for their interference in our election, but I support even enhanced sanctions against Russia. And
does Russia have bases in 130 foreign countries? America's got bases in 130 countries. Russia doesn't. How would we feel if Russia had bases in Mexico and in Canada? That's what we're doing around the world. We've got bases surrounding Russia, surrounding Iran.
Ms. McGrath, election integrity.
You know, I'm very concerned, and
Shouldn't we be talking to Korea and trying to de-escalate tensions? We've occupied Korea for 50 years.
I'm all for talking.
When can we come home? When can we come home from Germany? When can we come home from Japan? We've been over there for 70 years. We can't afford these wars anymore. We need to bring our troops home from around the world.
What kind of Kentucky do you want to leave your grandkids? Mr. Harris, should you be elected to represent the 6th Congressional District in Washington?
I would love to leave a Kentucky that didn't have to fear its own government. We're working toward a cashless society and a government-controlled healthcare system which will be used to control the population. It's that simple. Our own government wants to not only dominate the world militarily, they want to control us, their own citizens. The NSA is spying on every phone call you make, on every email that you send. Andy Barr has voted to allow the TSA to do these things to its own people.
When I first ran,
Barr.
thank you. When I first